As Rebecca noted, this is the first in our series of events, but I want to take a moment to say a word about the title of this speaker series, the David LaBerge series in Mind and Grade, speaker series in Mind and Grade Studies. David LaBerge, for whom the speaker series is named, taught here at Simon's Rock for a decade, from 1998 to 2000. David taught Intro to Cognitive Neuroscience, which I now teach. But anyway, David taught cognitive neuroscience, attention in the brain, among other courses, and he supervised many students in their research in neuropsychology. As the speaker series website states, the series name recognizes the contributions of former Simon's Rock faculty member David LaBerge, whose work continues to make significant contributions to our understanding of consciousness and whose teaching inspired many students of Simon's Rock and elsewhere in the study of neuropsychology. David is now living out on the West Coast with his wife Jan, who also taught psychology here at Simon's Rock, and he continues to do research on the neurological basis of consciousness with our own faculty member Ray Kasovich, and they have published numerous articles on their theory of resonance and apical dendrites. This speaker series thus recognizes and celebrates David's contributions to introducing neuropsychology to Simon's Rock and serving as an inspiration to so many of us at the college and to our graduates. But now, finally, I come to introducing our speaker this evening, Dr. Andrew Gerber. Andrew, have I told you that we do first name basis here? Okay, great. Okay. Andrew completed his PhD in psychology at the Freud Center and University College London, investigating the process and outcome of psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic psychotherapy in young adults. He completed his medical and psychiatric training at Harvard Medical School, Cambridge Hospital, and Weill Cornell and Columbia Medical Schools. He also has psychoanalytic training at Columbia. He trained as a research fellow in brain imaging and child psychiatry at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. He has published and received many grants in the area of developmental psychology, attachment, functional neuroimaging and dynamic processes, including social cognition and transference. He has also been involved in planning and teaching psychoanalytic research as head of the science department at the American Psychoanalytic Association and chair of the Committee on Scientific Activities. I have to parse out this sentence. He is also secretary of the Psychoanalytic Psychodynamic Research Society and a member of the Psychotherapy Research Committees of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Andrew's published scholarship is too numerous to summarize here, but I can assure you it is very impressive. And more importantly than all these empirical accomplishments, Andrew has a deep passion for the connection between research and clinical work and between psychoanalysis and neuroscience, and cares deeply about how the mind and brain work in order to treat mental illness. Even more noteworthy, Andrew is married to Dr. Andrea Gerber, who is a clinical psychologist and is now also a member of the Simon's Rock community, working as a clinician in our wellness center here on campus. Andrew has also been instrumental in forging this new partnership, even dare I say friendship, between Simon's Rock and Austen Riggs, and as we already have so much in common. Amy Taylor, a clinician at Riggs, is now also teaching courses here at Simon's Rock. Several Simon's Rock students are already doing research internships at Riggs. The IRB at Riggs and here at Simon's Rock are finding ways to collaborate. And Andrew recently made scholarships possible so that several Simon's Rock students and alumni could attend the recent conference on the neuroscience of mind-brain connections sponsored by Riggs and Columbia. This is a connection I am so looking forward to continuing to develop between Riggs and Simon's Rock and across institutions interested in mind-brain connections throughout Berkshire community. Please join me in welcoming Andrew as a speaker, a colleague, and I hope a newfound friend to the Simon's Rock community.
Thank you so much, Anne. I'm just going to get my slides. Okay. Let's see if I can do this. There we go. That's pretty good. All right. Well, it's such an honor and a pleasure to be here. I have to say that, it's when you form a new relationship and you keep finding things in common, that's a good sign. And so, for example, we had never spoken about first names, but it's so funny because it's one of the things that's always driven me crazy about the medical world is this kind of distancing that can happen with formality, with hierarchy, and things like that. And so I'm always fighting to be Andrew, and people wanting to call me something else, so I'm delighted that I didn't even have to ask, you knew it already. But but it's really great to get to know Simon's Rock. I'll tell you, my first contact with Simon's Rock, interestingly enough, was two supervisees, one a child psychiatry trainee and another an adult psychiatry trainee, who I was supervising at the same time. They're both incredible clinicians. They were both so smart, pushing me to think in new ways. And then I find out that they both went to Simon's Rock. So I'll give you their name too. I remember the first, I remember the lesson, but I'll look it up. But they taught me about this place long before I ever knew I would move to the Berkshires, and I was already incredibly impressed. And so when Amy then invited me to speak to her class, and I walked in and got the best questions and discussion that I gotten for this talk that I'd given to graduate students and residents and faculty, I knew I was in a very special place. And so it's a little intimidating, you can imagine, but I hope that tonight I'll give you some food for thought. And the way I like to give lectures is basically to leave it open for people to interrupt, ask questions, stop me. The important thing for me is to get people thinking and wondering and challenging. And I don't have to get through all my slides. Can't get through all my slides, but I'm not worried about that. I'm going to aim to speak for about half an hour so that we have the other half hour to talk. And as I said, that can be the end, but you can also interrupt me in the middle, and then we can just sort of do it as we go. All right, so let's get started. I mean, let me start with the most depressing slide by far. And sometimes I think, should I just leave this slide out? It's so much more cheerful not to have to talk about this. But I really find it a responsibility, particularly when you work in mental health like I do, working at Austen Riggs, but really, I think just in our country and in the world, to acknowledge the enormous burden of mental illness and the way that unlike other medical illnesses and unlike other societal burdens, I really believe that the numbers get underestimated. And you stop people in the street or you ask people just on the basis of reading the newspaper or listening to the news, how many people do you think are affected with mental illness? People don't quite have the scale of the problem that we have. So just to give you some of those numbers, 55 million Americans report mental illness. 66 million Americans take psychiatric medicine. You might already ask the question, what's going on there? Why is that number larger than that? And I don't have an easy answer to that. 26 million Americans report alcohol or substance abuse. 9 million serious suicidal thoughts. And this is all collected within a year. These are the numbers from 2015 and then from 2014. Of those 9 million suicidal thoughts, 1.3 million Americans will make suicide attempts this year. And of those, about 41,000 will successfully commit suicide. And by the way, a large proportion of that is with guns. So when people talk about guns being dangerous and killing, what they often forget is that the number of deaths by suicide are greater than the deaths by homicide. So if we think about what the damage access to guns in this country is doing, a lot of that has to do with suicide. Worldwide, there are 25 million suicide attempts and 1 million deaths per year, making it one of the leading causes of death at all ages, and the second most common cause after accidents in young adults. So this is a real present problem. It's present in our communities, in our towns, our villages, our universities, our families, and one in which, unlike so much else in medicine, we're not making progress right now, I'm sorry to say. And I'll show you some numbers about that in a little bit. But there's so much that needs to be done. This number is hard to estimate, but people do say that as many as 2/3 of adults with mental illness are receiving no treatment at all in this country. And naturally that has a lot to do with our healthcare system, not just our mental health system, but our medical healthcare system that leaves so many people out. And even in, I often say to people, even in what seem to be an affluent area like Berkshire County or South Berkshire County, I can't tell you how many people tell me about individuals who can't get access to good mental health treatment, psychiatry, psychotherapy, family therapy, etc. So it's true all over the country. And the distribution of providers is so massively skewed to areas of wealth, and as you can imagine, people with the resources therefore have a vastly disproportionate ability to get those treatments, don't have resources, just do not. I'm not blaming the DSM for that fact, but maybe through the lecture tonight we can think about how we got here, and of course my dream is that we can start to make a dent in some of these awful numbers. But let me start with where we are as a field right now. Right now, we are a field that defines its disorders using a manual called the DSM. We're currently in the 5th edition, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And you've ever read the DSM or looked at it, you'll see it is almost entirely a list of symptoms. It's not a list of causes. It's not a list of what I would call pathophysiology, that is, the mechanisms of what is going on in the mind or the brain that lead to these illnesses. It's a description of possible symptoms, often put together in clusters and standardized in such a way that clinicians or researchers can talk to one another. Incredibly important and a major advance when the first contemporary DSM came out in 1980, DSM-3. But not to be mistaken for an understanding of the underlying cause of mental illness or the underlying mechanisms of mental illness, which almost entirely we do not have. And that can sound exaggerated. What are all these neuroscientists, what are all these psychiatrists doing all the time? Well, it's amazing to say that we are still in our infancy of starting to figure these things out. And what I hope to show you today is a little bit about the direction things are going, but also an acknowledgement of how far we have to go and how little we know so far. You know, one of the reasons I mention this now is because if we're going to think about the real world of mental illness, we also have to be aware of where the lists of symptoms in this book, as useful as they are, don't necessarily match up with what's really happening or what we're seeing in our patients or in our family members or our friends or certainly in the patients that we see at Austen Riggs. I want to tell you a little bit about that. I'll start just by giving you just a little bit of information about the onset of mental illness. When we talk about people who are ill, we tend mostly to talk about adults, right? We very rarely talk about mental illness in very young children. Maybe we'll start talking about it in adolescence. But often we don't think of it as a childhood disorder, even though almost all mental illness has its origins in early life. Even if the manifestations and the diagnosis come much, much later, the origins are thought to, and there's good evidence to suggest, happen much earlier. So it would be as if we were talking about pneumonia, but we'd never diagnosed pneumonia when you first started coughing. We would diagnose pneumonia 3, 4, 10 years later when all that coughing had led to some other consequence. And of course that confuses things a lot because of all that time. So just to give you an illustration, about half of lifelong mental disorders start by their mid-teens, 3/4 by their mid-20s, and this is some very widely accepted data. 22% of young adults in 18 to 25 range had diagnosable mental illness. That's not to say young adults have more mental illness than anybody else. It's just to say that these things start early, yet we don't necessarily acknowledge or recognize them until much later. And affective disorders in particular, that means mood disorders like depression, anxiety, are the ones that we're seeing most often starting in early age range. Schizophrenia also, if you study it very carefully, peaks in the teens into the early 20s. Bipolar disorder as well, you see a peak here beneath 20. So really all these disorders are disorders ultimately of adolescence or latest young adulthood. Okay. I guess I had more than one depressing slide, so all right. Here's another depressing one, which is what I mentioned earlier about the suicide rate. So while we're making enormous advances in the fields of cancer and immunology and cardiology and pulmonology, all these fields of medicine that have been on this steady pace to improve life expectancy, to decrease the burden of illness, we have, if anything, gone in the wrong direction on suicide. So if you look from 2008 to 2015, you're seeing that suicide in the 18 to 25 age range is slowly rising. Here in this one, you see 24% rise in completed suicides between 1999 and 2014. And this is very, very widely accepted data. Nobody knows why. Nobody has a theory for this, and this is despite all sorts of things that public health folks, psychiatry folks, psychology folks, social workers are in theory doing to support health. The National Institute of Mental Health, which is an incredibly important funding agency, the most important funding agency for research in mental health, spends about $1.2 to $1.5 billion every year, and has for the last several decades, really since the Clinton administration. It's been spending that kind of money. Yet, the suicide rate isn't going down, it's continuing to rise. So how do we start to wrap our minds around this enormous problem? Where do we start? It can feel so overwhelming, given there are a lot of smart people doing a lot of interesting research, yet we're not going in the right direction. And I want to suggest today that the first place is to start with fundamentals. Because I think there's a way, it's probably true of all sciences, but it's particularly true of mental health related research, that you can get stuck in a set of assumptions that may seem quite reasonable because that's the way everybody else is talking, and end up missing something very important and basic that then skews all of the work you do later on. So I'm going to mention a couple of those as food for thought, because they really inform the way I do my work. The first is something about distributions. Okay, you guys probably recognize this. This is a normal distribution curve. Remember this from statistics class or from math class or somewhere. What is a normal distribution curve? One version of it, the most common version, is if you want to think about some biologic parameter, think about height, think about weight, you think about blood pressure, the first number or the second number, and you say, okay, let's measure it in a large group of people, and let's count the number that have in category 1, category 2, category 3, up to category 20, let's say, as it's increasing. What you'll see, if you center it around the mean, is that the largest number of people have the average. And as you go lower or as you go higher, the numbers fall off. But it's a continuous, smooth curve, right? It's not like half the people have one value and half the people have another value. It's that there's this distribution of the population. That's called the normal distribution, and there's ways to derive this and to show that this is likely to happen. Well, we're very used to in medicine talking about diseases that don't look like this, but that look like this. I'll give you the classic example of it. If I said, if everybody could measure the amount of bacteria in their appendix right now, I'm assuming that everybody in this room, nobody has an appendicitis. All of you have very, very small numbers of bacteria in your appendix. If I went onto a medical unit that specialized in people with appendicitis, everybody would have a lot of bacteria in their appendices, okay? And if we then plotted what this looked like in terms of a distribution, it would not look like this. It would look like this. That is, a small number of people, it's a little bit flipped around, but here's a number of people who have a lot of bacteria. Here's the majority of people who have very little or almost no bacteria. And there's no mistaking these two things. It's very easy, if you can look into an appendix, to tell the people who have appendicitis from those who don't. Nobody has half an appendicitis, right? And so it's very clear when we think about it as a medical term how to name it, because you have it or you don't. And the treatment, however hard that is, and right now it's pretty easy, but years ago it was pretty hard, the treatment's very clear. If you've got the disease, you better take out the appendix. If you don't have the disease, you should leave the appendix alone, right? That's the way most people think about medical illnesses. But it turns out that some medical illness, and all psychiatric illness, look more like this than like this. If I were to measure how much depression across Berkshire County, it wouldn't look like this at all. It would look like this. That there's a mean amount, and there are some people who are more depressed, and then there are some people who are less. If I measure attentional ability, like ADHD, right? We think of someone that have ADHD or you don't, right? No, it's not actually true. It would look like this. There's a mean number of people that had, a large number of people that had something in the middle, and then smaller numbers that have large and smaller. Even things that we tend to think of as, oh my God, I don't have that, psychosis, for example. If you measure it in a continuous way, that is, you ask questions that don't artificially divide people, you'll find that the vulnerability of people developing disorganized or what in the extreme version we tend to call psychotic thoughts is a normally distributed parameter. Same for autism, okay? So all of these things that we tend to think of as you have it or you don't, because maybe if you go to your GP or if you go to your psychiatrist, you have to fill in a form and check a box, actually look like this, not like this. Now this is not unusual in medicine either. The classic example in medicine is high blood pressure. We kind of take it for granted. You measure everybody's blood pressure, it looks like this. So then you say, well, how does a doctor decide when someone has hypertension or not? And the answer is that a committee, a group of people gets together and draws what is essentially an arbitrary line and says, okay, if we draw the line here, say 160 systolic, the first number, we're going to say that anybody who has more than 160 systolic has hypertension, and anybody who has less doesn't. Now, that leads to some natural weirdnesses, like 161 is hypertension and 159 isn't. Is 161, 159 really that different? Not at all. But cardiologists and GPs know this, and they kind of take it for granted that the decisions we make aren't stuck neatly around yes or no, but we use it as a kind of shorthand. I would argue that in mental health, we believe that shorthand too much. We believe too much that people either have an illness or don't. And one could even argue that we do that to protect ourselves, because to walk around and think, well, I have a little depression, I have a little autism, I have a little ADHD, I have a little psychosis, is scary, even if it's true. And so these are the kinds of things that I think as a society and as individuals we want to take into consideration. So that's one. Let me tell you the second one, which is very important, which is the notion of what's often called in medicine or psychiatry comorbidity. Fancy word that essentially means you have more than one diagnosis. Now, this is related to my last point, because if you really believe that you have it or you don't, so appendicitis you have or you don't, a brain tumor you have or you don't, if you have both an appendicitis and a brain tumor, that's real comorbidity. That is, I have two diseases. And the treatments for brain tumors and the treatments for appendicitis are very different. You need both if you have both of them. Now, could they interfere with one another? You gotta decide which one to do first, et cetera, but they're really two separate things. The problem is in that in psychiatry, because of the DSM, because of the way we list symptoms, we very often act like people have multiple diagnoses. You have depression, and you have anxiety, and you have post-traumatic stress disorder, and you have OCD, when that's not four different things. That's four terms, it's four labels for what is most likely one underlying problem. But because we don't have the pathophysiology or the etiology, we're calling it by its clusters of symptoms. And this has been borne out by the data. This is a 2013 study, I think, from Harold Rogier, the NIMH, where they looked in a large sample at things like major depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, alcohol use disorder, and generalized anxiety. And what they see is all this overlap, right? I like it because it's kind of colorful, it looks like a peacock. But look at all this overlap. The overlap is far larger than the single diagnosis. Yet, because we've gotten a little bit obsessed with this notion of a pure diagnosis, almost all research that's in psychiatric journals, and now increasingly in neuroscience journals, is in the single disorders, not in these comorbidities. And if you ask why, the researchers will say, well, to get funded, nobody wanted me to study this, it's too messy. Yes, it's messy, but it's also reality. This is also who is coming to our clinics, coming to our hospitals, and so on. Now, that doesn't mean to say there's nobody in these more specific groups. These tend to be much more mildly ill individuals, and that's great. I'm not against mild illness. But for a place like Austen Riggs or a place like an inpatient psychiatric unit, I can tell you that these almost never happen. The average number of diagnoses at Austen Riggs, and these are not diagnoses we've necessarily made, that come with them, is over 5. That is, people come with multiple labels. And of course, they feel horrible because people are giving them 5 different labels. They're supposed to figure out how to treat 5 different things, which of course you can't do, because it's one set of problems that we just don't have a very good way to describe. Okay. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because I want to make sure to get through more. But let me just pause for a second there and see if there's any questions or any thoughts about these two kind of basic concepts I introduced. Keep moving, but interrupt me, please. Yeah. So one of the questions that becomes, all right, so I'm very good at complaining about what I don't like in nomenclature in psychiatry. I don't like these labels. I don't like the categorical differences, etc. I don't like the DSM. I don't use it all the time. So I better suggest something better. And I'm happy to say that I do think we're getting to a place in the field where there are some other ideas. And let me start by giving you a kind of metaphor for it, because how we actually implement it, we haven't all decided yet, but the metaphor I like, which is instead of thinking of people as in categories of depression, anxiety, PTSD, etc., what if we think of individuals as having a long list of attributes, right? And each of these attributes sits on some continuum. And some of us are high on some, and low on others, and in the middle on others. And what ends up mattering in our lives is not labeling that one as too low or too high or in the middle, but understanding the interaction between these different attributes and our experiences in the real world. Okay? So I'll give you a kind of graphical depiction of that. If we think of individuals as having some combination of weaknesses and strengths, because on average, we're all high on something, low on others, in the middle on others. And that's true of everybody, whether they're psychiatric patients, whether they're homeless shelters, or whether they're college students or college professors. But if we think of their weaknesses and strengths as mattering not on their own, but in relation to the experiences they have. There's good experiences, and this is, calling something a weakness and strength or good and bad, that itself is a false dichotomy, but for a minute for the graphic, right? And then we think, how are these weaknesses and strengths going to interact with good and bad experiences? Are the good strengths going to line up in some kind of a synergistic way with the good experiences and produce success? Or are the weaknesses going to line up with bad experiences and produce negative life effects? And of course, it's not like one happens or the other happens. These things are happening to all of us all the time. But the proportion of these versus these matters. And what we end up calling illness, I would argue, is a higher proportion of these kinds of things than these. But if we want to understand them better, we've got to drill down and understand the strengths and weaknesses, not as illnesses in and of themselves, because they're not. They're dispositions, they're attributes. And by the way, the same attribute in one circumstance could be extremely useful, and in another, be extremely not useful. So it's not even the nature of the attribute that tells you whether it's good or bad. It's the environment and how it matches up with it that makes it so. And this is the kind of model we have to really have in order to understand illness. There's a question about that.
Yeah, I have a question about, there's this quote that people say that your past doesn't define you. I just wanted to check, a quote, your past doesn't define you.
Your past doesn't define you.
Yeah, and how does this kind of go into this kind of career?
Yeah, so listen, it's like all things, it's both true and not true, right? The beauty of being a human being, in some ways, is that the past doesn't have to define you. As long as you live in a culture that gives you the personal freedoms to transcend and overcome your past. So I would argue that no amount of negative environment, even when it's paired with a weakness, is necessarily condemning you to a negative future, right? On the other hand, it does make it harder, right? And if these continue to accumulate, particularly if you've got a negative cycle, where the accumulation of negative events plus negative attributes leads to more negative events and the exacerbation of more attributes, you're in a negative cycle. And then it does get worse, and your past becomes your future. But if you're able to turn this around, then I would argue your past doesn't define you. I'll give you my example of this. If you can intervene and somehow prevent these negative experiences from interacting with these negative attributes, or not even negative attributes, but attributes that at least tie into there, suddenly your past doesn't define you anymore. So you set me up for my next slide.
You're interfering. Now, what is visible? Here I call that effective psychotherapy, but it could be anything, right? It could be friendship. It could be experience. It could be an insight. It could be learning something new, an opportunity. It could be a million different things, right? And in a way, that's our goal, not just as a society, but as mental health professionals, which is identifying where one can intervene in this way. I would also argue that our goal is to identify the strengths and line those up with positive experiences. And I think people don't do that too little as health professionals. Yes?
So this isn't in reference to the really powerful Peacock slide, but I have a question about thinking of someone who starts off with having one neurological disorder and how that can lead into having others. And in terms of diagnoses, are clinicians taking that into account when they list all of the neurological disorders that this person may have? And if not, do you find it important to consider the timing of things under that circumstance?
Great question. I guess the first question, which we would have to spend some time on, is differentiating, I think, what I would traditionally call a neurologic disorder versus a psychiatric disorder, which is a bit of an arbitrary and funny division, because you could argue neurologists and psychiatrists, they both work in the brain. Why are there two different fields? And the answer is that over time, neurology has in some ways been given, in some ways taken, the disorders that are more like that. Sorry, I showed you at the beginning. Right? So if you think of a neurologic disorder like a stroke or epilepsy or even going to neuro-oncology or the brain, those do look more like this. Where psychiatry is sort of held on these. So if you're speaking about neurologic disorders that are quite definable and separate, and by the way, I'm not going to try to argue that having a brain tumor is partly a strength, or having epilepsy is partly a strength. I mean, you can come up with an example or something. But no, those are more classic disorders in the sense that it's silly to try to put too positive a spin on them. Mental disorders and psychiatric disorders are really different in that regard. Now, if what you meant was neurologic disorders, do those impact psychiatric disorders? Absolutely. I wasn't counting them in, only counting psychiatric. But if you call psychiatric disorders neurobiologic, which of course they all are, I'll show you some pictures of that, then I would argue that they're all together. And then when I'm talking about these strengths and weaknesses, like the extent of your depression, the extent of your anxiety, the extent of your psychosis, those things all are in continuum, and I am counting those. So I hope that answers that. Let me jump ahead a little bit though, because I want to see something about neuroscience, because that was in the title, right? So this was our conference last weekend, which was wonderful to have many of you there. And this is a slide that I showed there because it feels important. It's always important to remember that what we're talking about are models, and that all models are wrong, but some are useful. This is George Fox, a famous statistician, who said this. And by this, I'm trying to remind myself and remind all of you that we go from one model to another. We don't go from not truth to truth. I wish we did, but we're moving in a very incremental way. And I'm going to skip over this a little bit. But what we're doing in neuroscience right now is we're really trying to use contemporary technologies to move those models towards things that are more useful. Are they going to be perfectly accurate? Of course not. But I hope they're going to be more accurate. Now, why is that such a challenge? This you probably all have a sense of. The brain is the most complicated machine in the universe, as far as we know. 100 billion neurons and 1 quadrillion synapses, as incredibly powerful as all computers we can build are, and so on. None of them remotely approach the complexity of a single 3-pound brain that we're all carrying around. So this really is a remarkable feat of evolution that we are only scratching the surface of understanding. And sometimes we talk about the parts we know in great detail, which is fine. We understand neurons, the individual cells, very, very well. We understand synaptic transmission, the way neurons communicate with one another, fairly well. We even have a pretty good sense of what the chemicals are that one neuron secretes, that the other neuron senses, that tend to be called neurotransmitters. And one can get a little sense of false comfort because you think, well, we know this, we know this, we know this. Oh, we kind of know the brain, right? Well, it turns out the answer is that's Because what the brain ultimately is a series of connections. And these connections grow from the time of conception in a geometric fashion up through gestation, through adolescence, and even into adulthood. That is, it's the forming of these connections between these 100 billion neurons, whether they're forming, whether they're being pruned away, how they're forming, how they're reinforced. That's what makes up the complexity and is not adequately encompassed by what we know so far. So how are we going to do that? And here's a little disclaimer I also need to put in, because the technology that I'm most excited about is that of brain imaging, because it enables us to measure in a live, behaving human being various aspects of their neural network, whether it be physical features, whether it be the more connection and dynamic features, while they're behaving. And that lets us match it up with strengths, weaknesses, behaviors, illnesses, and all that important stuff. But we got to be careful, because people have been trying to do this for a long time. So this is something I like to show now. This is a picture of a man I met in Newport named Ben Riggs. And you may notice the last name. It's not a coincidence. Well, Ben Riggs was the son of another Ben Riggs, who was a psychiatrist who practiced mostly in South Carolina. Well, this Ben Riggs was the son of Austen Riggs. This is Austen Riggs, who founded the Austen Riggs Center in 1919. But his father was also called Ben Riggs. Was born sometime in the early 19th century. Was a kind of an interesting guy. And in the 1850s, he went to see this man, whose name is Fowler. And you may recognize this name if you've ever seen one of those little ceramic heads with all the lines around it. Because Fowler popularized those things because he believed and argued that you could tell a person's attributes, strengths and weaknesses, sound notes, not, by feeling the bumps on their skull. And in fact, he did that to Austen Riggs' father, Ben Riggs. And I have the original copy of the Fowler phrenological report from 1857. And this is what he said: your head is rather too large for your body. You must keep your mind quick and exercise more physically. By the way, this is one of the reasons why Austen Riggs liked the Berkshires, because he was very into physical exercise. And if any part got this from his dad. Your education should be directed to the physical or the mental. You have the tone of mind peculiar to your mother, the size of brain inherited from your father. Consequently, you are naturally inclined to study and exercise your mind. You're too old for one of your age, and your mind is premature from the amounts of discipline you had. Not really sure what that means. This was all from feeling bumps on his skull. So we have to be careful to not just do this again and act like now we have an MRI machine. It's a lot more expensive. It's much more colorful. Now we're measuring a different kind of bump on the head. I'm not quite that cynical to think we haven't made any progress, but you also have to be humble about what you haven't done. But now let me tell you something about MRI before I wrap up, because I really do think it's a technology that, unlike Fowler, we're going to look back and appreciate. MRI has a number of incredibly useful parameters. One is that it uses no ionizing radiation, so unlike X-rays, CAT scans, you're not exposed to the harmful kind of radiation or ionizing radiation. And if you're going to develop a research tool, certainly if you're going to subject a subject to something repeated, you don't want to do something that's also harming them. And MRI uses magnetic fields, and that's a whole lot safer. It's also true that both its spatial resolution, that is its ability to see small details in the brain, and its temporal resolution, which is its ability to repeat over time very quickly, are vastly better than any of the other technologies around. Okay? Now, most MRI that you see when you see typical pictures is what's called structural MRI. That's looking literally at the structure of a brain in a live brain person. But we also have functional MRIs. And this is something that gets a lot of press because it enables us to see brain activity, not just structure. And by combining the two, we can overlay this activity and say which parts of the brain have neurons that are firing more, which parts of the brain are connected more in terms of their firing, and so on. And so a lot of what we're doing in cognitive neuroscience these days is related to functional MRI. But we're not stopping there. Fusion tensor imaging is a newer MRI technology. It's the same basic machinery, the same basic technology, but instead of looking either at pure structure or pure function, It's actually looking at the connectivity or the pathways that go from one part of the cortex to another, what the so-called white matter pathways. And it's turning out that I think a lot of the understanding of certain mental illnesses, maybe you'll hear this from Liz when she talks about autism, can be found in disorders of connectivity. And there's these hypotheses of this being true of other mental disorders as well. Now, science, often progresses not just when there's big new ideas, but when practical things happen that really make a big difference. So I'm going to end telling you a little bit about some practical things that are going on that make this a very exciting time, I think, in the history of studying complex psychiatric illness, in particular neuroimaging. About 6-7 years ago, the National Institute of Mental Health, I criticized before, had the foresight to invest about $40 million into a nationwide network of a standardized method for collecting MRI. Until then, every site, whether it was Columbia or Yale or Harvard or UCLA or the University of Texas, kind of did their own thing. And they really couldn't compare across sites because every MRI machine, every set of data analyses, software, and so on were quite different. And when people got different findings, they never knew whether it was because the subjects were different, or they were disagreeing with each other, or because just their techniques were different. And the NIH said, no, you guys have to get on the same page. And they called this the Human Connectome Project. And they invested all these resources to get people to come up with a standardized protocol, which they did successfully. And this was really driven in large part by the Washington University in St. Louis and the University of Minnesota, which had two very significant MRI centers. But there were sites all across the country. And then NIH put even more money into saying, okay, you want to get funded to do more research now. You've got to use the same protocol that the guys developed in the Human Connectome Project. So I heard this quote recently, which is a little crude, but it's true, I think. Francis Collins, who's the director of the NIH, the whole NIH, National Institute of Health, said, getting scientists to work together is like herding cats. You've probably heard that before. But there's a way to herd cats. You move their food. And so he did that. The NIH did that by making the funding priorities in line with the Human Connectome Project pipeline. And this is hardware, this is software, this is protocols, this is all sorts of things. And it also enabled someone like Austen Riggs, or Austen Riggs Center, to get into a business that otherwise we would have been vastly too small to do. So we're now scanning patients with complex psychiatric disorders from Pittsfield area, using the Human Connectome pipeline, or the protocol, at a scanner at UMass in Amherst. So you can now be a small site with an idea and create that from essentially the modules that you can get off the shelf. And this is very exciting. And by the way, from a computer science perspective or an informatics perspective, you can store all of this in the cloud in ways that you used to have to buy these enormous hard drives and invest gobs of money in backups and so on. Now you store it all in the cloud. And as long as you have a fast internet connection, you push that and pull from the cloud, and that enables you to share data with others in a way that just wasn't possible. So this is a really exciting advance. Let me tell you a few things that have come out of it, and then I'll stop for more questions. One is this notion of parcellation, and each one of these could be a lecture unto itself. But the notion that we can subdivide regions of the brain into meaningful pieces, which is not fundamentally unlike this, right? It's kind of a parcellation. Now, it was a parcellation kind of made up. But now, we have much more sophisticated empirical ways to parcel it. What you're looking at here is a scheme for subdividing regions of brain connectivity in much smaller pieces than we could ever do before using the Human Connectome software, as well as the very large data set that they've collected, which is so far about 2,000 brains. And so we now have theories about different functioning in different parts of the brain that are much more sophisticated, much more empirically validated than ever before. What we can then do is start to apply that to understanding psychiatric illness. So something that sounds as simple as depression, right? But remember what I said before, depression is a symptom. Depression isn't an underlying physiology. We can now take individuals with depression, apply the Human Connectome pipeline, apply these parcellation schemes, and end up seeing different clusters. So this is a paper from last year, Nature Medicine, where they saw 4 neurophysiologic biotypes of depression.
right? This was not based on asking people questions, right? And in fact, it didn't even need to line up with the symptoms people were describing. It'd be like, you had 100 people who said they had fever, and you had no way to distinguish them because they all had fevers, right? You said, oh, high fever, low fever, none. It never seemed to work, right? And then you give these people a throat culture or chest x-ray, and now you've got people divided into pneumonia or upper respiratory infections or lung cancer, right? That's what we can do with an MRI that we couldn't do before. That's in depression. We're seeing differences in generalized anxiety disorder and controls, and it's on the verge of starting to subtype different types of anxiety. And a lot of this is happening using a particular aspect of functional MRI called resting state connectivity. And it's kind of an interesting development that often things get more complicated and harder, but every now and then they get simpler. And a lot of the early work at fMRI was done with tasks. That is, you ask people to do increasingly complicated things, like, read this slide, think about this, and I'm going to compare you in all these different states. And then somebody came along, Marcus Rakel, and said, well, what if you ask them to do nothing at all? Just have them lie there, right? And I was like, what's that going to tell you? Well, it turns out the brain, unlike a typical machine, when you think you're doing nothing, your brain's doing a lot of work. And you're firing away in all sorts of ways. And the patterns with which you're firing when you're quote-unquote resting actually tell you an enormous amount about differences in individuals. And so using these resting state connectivity maps and dividing them into these different functional networks, we can now look at the different subtypes of depression and distinguish them from anxiety in ways that we just couldn't do by just asking people questions about their symptoms. And then finally, my last slide, just to say that this is not just about strengths and weaknesses, it's also about experiences. So if you ask the question, what does trauma do to children, right? If you really believe in, as we said in the conference, the end of dualism, with that mind and brain are one, then the effects of severe experiences, or any experiences really, are affecting the substrate of the brain. We're not hardware and software, we're all wetware. And in fact, we can now see, again, using some of the more contemporary techniques from the Connecto projects, you can see clear differences in the size of areas of the hippocampus, it depends on which part, in response to trauma. So we are having physiologic, biological effects that we can now measure in a particular area of the brain, and the hippocampus, as you know, has a lot to do with memory formation and so on, in response to this. Now, how does that differ in different individuals? How does that differ with the kind of trauma, when the trauma happened? These are all questions we can ask now because we have some of the technologies to do it. So we're right at the beginning, but I would argue that what you're seeing here is a set of techniques that over the coming decades is going to tell us a tremendous amount about the underlying physiology of all mental illness, including the complex kind, because that's the kind I'm most interested in, and hopefully really impact the way we care for people. On that note, I will stop and leave the rest of the time for questions. Thank you. I'm starting at 20 minutes. It's hard on Thursday night. Yes?
Sorry, may I just sit off again? I have a question about, I'm not sure if it's the same thing, so I'm asking. What's the difference between neuroscience and neuropsychology?
Good question. So, the first, there are probably multiple answers to this, but the first is kind of areas of specialization. Neuroscience is typically thought of as a discipline within a kind of university biology department. It's a branch of biology, and now because it's gotten bigger, it's split off in different universities. But it's essentially an academic pursuit. Nobody is a clinical neuroscientist, or if they are, I'm using that term loosely. Neuropsychology is actually a term that often refers more to a clinical subspecialty. So psychologists who are clinically trained can subspecialize in neuropsychology and therefore administer a set of behavioral tests that have become useful in diagnosing and in assessing certain kinds of disorders. Maybe something that Liz will talk about more when she talks about it. Now, is that only what neuropsychology means? Well, in some places, neuropsychology is probably used to refer
to a kind of approach that can be combined with neuroscience, and then it gets a little bit messy and loose. Like lots of disciplines, there's all sorts of overlap. You could probably draw a peacock diagram for neuropsychology and neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience, and you folks probably even know that even the names of psychology departments are training. Is it called psychology here? But at Amherst it's called psychological and brain sciences. Is that right? PBS they call it. So different universities are combining these terms in different ways, and we'll see where it all settles.
I was curious, you mentioned that we should sort of not just be thinking necessarily about neurotransmitters, but I guess I'm wondering how much do you think the complexity of, say, the dopamine system or the serotonin system, because, we see the same neurotransmitters implicated in different psychological disorders, and it sounds to me like this maybe where the Connectome project is coming in, because we don't really understand, we might treat, with schizophrenia, we might want to reduce the dopamine activity, but with depression, we might want to increase dopamine activity, and serotonin is all over the place. It does sound like we have really no idea what these neurotransmitters are doing in or
Yeah. I think basically yes. From a clinical perspective, there was a hope, a wish, and it was propagated, I think, fairly widely in the 70s into the 80s, 1970s into the 1980s, of various hypotheses, like the so-called dopamine hypothesis. Dopamine hypothesis of depression, as you said, was that you got too little dopamine, and if we can boost the dopamine, and this was thought to be, one of the ways the antidepressants worked, you could make them less depressed. And the dopamine hypothesis of schizophrenia is the other way. You have too much dopamine, and if you block the dopamine, and the classic antipsychotics were all dopamine blockers. And of course, that would have been so fantastic if it was the whole story. But it turns out that when the pharmaceutical industry and others developed new dopamine blockers, they didn't always work as anti-schizophrenic agents, and then they developed all sorts of new dopamine agonists or promoters of dopamine, and they didn't always help depression. So then people said, oh, it's not just dopamine, let's get serotonin in there. And that didn't seem to pan out either. And then I think what drove people the most crazy, or at least clinicians, is you started seeing that the drugs that were supposed to be for one actually help for the other. So Abilify, which is mostly a partial dopamine antagonist, is now increasing, which so for schizophrenia is developed, is now increasingly being used for depression. So the specificity of these drugs, while not zero, is nowhere near what people hoped for. And clinically, you'll be very rare to find a psychiatrist who sticks to these hypotheses as they make changes in their individual patients. In other words, most of what we do, I'm sorry to say, in psychiatry is trial and error. And we have some general criteria, which is we start with the less toxic of the medications. We increase their dose, and if they don't work, we go something a little more toxic, a little more and first do no harm kind of stuff. But I wish it were true that we had that kind of specificity. Now, that's not to say that neurotransmitters don't matter. Of course they matter. And of course there's some specificity, right? Like, a more probably clear example would be GABA. So GABA is something that we block GABA in anti-anxiety. Now that's really different than antidepressants and antipsychotics. Come to think of it, you can definitely treat somebody's depression with a little bit of a GABA blocker. So there are some differences, but I don't know what they are. Now, that's all my rational answer. I'll give you a cynical answer as well. At the conference over the weekend, somebody had a slide, which is one of the things I love, of this guy on his hands and knees looking for his keys. And he's looking under a street. It's night. He's looking under a street lamp, and there's a cop there. And the cop says to him, where'd you lose your keys? Where'd you see them last? He's like, oh, down the street. It's like, well, why are you looking here? It's like, well, it's because the light is over here. And we do that in science all the time. So why am I de-emphasizing neurotransmitters? I'm not really very good at measuring neurotransmitters. That's the honest truth. And if MRI was great at measuring neurotransmitters, I'd probably be up here telling you how interesting my new study on dopamine and serotonin is. So, being a little bit of myself, but one of the dreams of MRI is to develop ways of measuring more specific receptor sites, like dopamine. Also, by the way, there are many different types of dopamine receptors, there are many different types of serotonin receptors. We can do that in positron emission tomography or PET, but that uses a lot of radiation and the resolution is really bad. So we can do that in MRI, capitalize on all the features of that. Neurotransmitters will propagate news again. So, take it as a great result. More questions? Yes?
I guess like the first part of the lecture was talking more about the ways in which our conceptual understanding of illness is like very Cartesian, put it that way, like it's discrete and discrete separate units. Do you think so? There's advances in MRI, but these ultimately neuropsychology or neuropsychoanalytic work, it's kind of this work of correlation between these illness constructs that are conceptual constructs, right, and this underlying neurophysiology. So like now that we have, well, me and Anne were talking about big data, just like, do you think now that there's big data analysis and things like that, that might allow for a more interactive and multivariable understanding of illness constructs conceptually, that will like also kind of maximize the advances in this integrative field?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you pointed it out in that kind of clear way because, one of the challenges is conceptual, but another is practical. And, when studies, when we didn't have big data, when we didn't have the ability to share all these data sets in the cloud, very often data analyses were really on group 1 that doesn't have schizophrenia, and group 2 does have schizophrenia. And let's do t-tests and compare group 1 to group 2. And for practical reasons, that was the best you could do. And what we have now is an increasing database that's not just categorical, but that has all these parameters in it. So to give you an example, Human Connector Project, yeah, it's got a field for diagnosis, but I don't use that field. I use all the other fields, of which there's hundreds, that are describing their measures on various neuropsychological and behavioral tests. And that's more interesting to me than using categorical diagnosis. Now, there is still a tension in the funding world. When Tom Insel, in his final years as director of the NIMH, he kind of made a stand and said, we're not going to use diagnoses anymore. And he helped develop or supported the development of something called RDoC, or the Research Domain Criteria. And if anybody's interested in this, just Google RDoC on NIMH, and you'll see this very complicated, elaborate system of these different parameters that he said ultimately should replace the DSM. And again, when moving food, he said, you're only going to get your grant if you use RDoC, not DSM. So everybody, I was at Columbia at the time, everybody at Columbia, went to their grants and did like search and replace. And every time they said depression, they now said high on these RDoC constructs. So it was a kind of, huge, and there was a huge pushback against Tom Insel, kind of soft, and the review committees kind of refused, because they were medical scientists, kind of refused to do what he wanted. He got so frustrated. I mean, I think he was ready to retire anyway, but he eventually retired. And that was kind of a bust. So they went back in a way to some of the categorical diagnoses because it was more practical to do it that way. And I think there's going to be this tension between the two because, frankly, as a clinician, I can't use RDoC. It's too complex. It doesn't help me with my patients. I still use some of these old crude diagnostics. So we're going to have a hybrid for a while. And by the way, RDoC's not the only one. That's the NIMH one, but there's another one called HiTOP, which is a newer, kind of more clinically friendly version of they call a hierarchical taxonomy of psychopathology. That's what HiTOP stands for. And that's got more of these continuous variables in it as well. So I think, just to go back to agree with your point, as we get better able to handle these large data sets, and we have MRI that itself is a set of these huge continuous variables, I think you're increasingly going to see the categories fall apart. More questions? Yes?
My question is, do you think we really make any progress on human comprehensive of prevention of mental illness when the technology like MRI or MRI? If you do, what the data you show in the
So you're saying the last piece, just
So
one?
why the next, if we're doing kind of progress, why suicide rate is
Right.
still increasing?
Right. So that to me is the whole thing. If we can intervene early enough, because I believe that so many of these things accumulate over time, that if you're only targeting the severe illness, you know, that was my example before, you had your cough for 10 years, you know, as opposed to targeting things much earlier. I think by targeting them earlier, which you're suggesting, I think then you really have a chance to, over time, lower things like the suicide rate. But it's going to require a lot of things to happen. First, it's going to require understanding the physiology of the developmental process, so that we understand how you get from a child of 7 who doesn't meet criteria for any diagnosis, shouldn't, but has some strengths and weaknesses that match up to certain aspects in their environment, that if we play forward 10 years, it's going to make them at high risk for suicide. And then we pull that intervention back. And by the way, I don't think that intervention is going to be medicine or biological treatment. I think that intervention is going to be environmental. And again, the best example of this I have, and I hope I'm not setting up badly, Liz, is in autism. Because I think as we've moved I used to do autism research, that's why I really like it. You know, so as we move the age of diagnosis lower and lower, you know, some people are offended. They're like, oh my God, how could you be calling a 6-month-old or a 1-year-old on the autism spectrum? It's not about labeling. It's not about calling them having this. It's about identifying the vulnerability that if you intervene in the right behavioral way, can make a huge difference later on. The metaphor that I remember being taught early in my training was, imagine a ship, you know, leaving the harbor, and if you can change the angle of its trajectory 1 degree, which is really tiny, imagine, you know, a week later, how much you've changed where that ship has ended up. And I think that's true in intervening early, and I think if we can use MRI, which I hope we will be able to, in infants or children, because again, it's a safe technology that we can use in very young children to identify some of these vulnerabilities, then you can make interventions early and vastly improve the trajectory. And it is going to take a long time before we know that works. And you know, one of the other kind of funny things, and it's not just true about science or psychiatry, it's true about our country in general. We like the quick fix, right? We like the thing that's going to get you elected in 2 years. And so you got to see that change right away. We're talking about changes that are going to take decades. So we also have to have a structure that allows for kind of long-term data collection. And NIH grants 5 years, a typical one. And you know, in your 3rd year, you start to plan to get your next grant. So you really have 2 years in some ways to kind of do your science. And that's not enough to do some of these projects. So we got to think about the funding mechanisms in other ways to incentivize much longer term research. I hope that gets you. Yes?
Kind of off of that, within the context of like the forward at the beginning of the 1980 version of the DSM, talking about how diagnoses are kind of boundaries and like not very much used for insurance purposes, and then in the context of the way the DSM is more used for insurance and diagnosis that way. And the recent creation of other diagnostic methods, do you see the way the DSM relates to insurance and functionality changing with consultation?
Yeah. That's a great question. You know, I wish I could say that I had confidence that the relationship between the mental health world and the insurance funding mechanisms will follow science. Of course, it should, right? But the amounts of money that are involved in terms of the healthcare system and the complexity of the way our reimbursement system means that, to me, that is a universe unto itself. How the insurance companies are using these various constructs to control their expenses. And I'm sorry if it sounds too conspiracy theory. I don't mean people, insurance companies are all evil. They don't like you. No. You're not evil, but we've given some, you know, we've taken this capitalist idea and applied it to something that has really turned into a nightmare. And I can tell you as a provider, both New York and now here at Riggs, to watch the way that system is designed to save money and not designed to provide good care is truly frightening. And my fear is that if our system, the same system we have now, is just in 10 years from now, it's going to be just as bad. And all right, maybe won't call it the DSM, they'll call it something else. I mean, I'll give you a important example, but just one that's on my mind. At Riggs, we often go to insurance companies and say, you guys should be paying for this person's stay. And we get turned down all the time. And we follow all their, go to their website, we follow their hotlines, we're following all their rules. And we dig, we and a bunch of lawyers finally discovered that there was a set of criteria that the insurance companies were using that weren't developed by mental health professionals at all. They were developed by the business folks. And they had an elaborate scheme for doing it, and I understood it was saving them money, and so on. And so there's a series of class action lawsuits now around the country. There's a few in California just recently. And so far they've been going in favor of the plaintiff. That is, insurance companies are are losing these battles. The problem is the penalties are not large enough to counteract how much insurance companies make from using these systems. So until this becomes a more national level thing, and until the judges put penalties or even prohibit some of these practices, I don't have a lot of hope. And because our whole healthcare system is so broken, I wish I could say we could look for the answer there. We'll keep trying this case. Sure.
I read a lot now that they're using electric shock treatment a lot more than they did for a long, long time. And the same thing, the experimentation that's happening with the psychedelics. And so that's going away from the model of using the pharmaceuticals. So could you just talk about that a little bit to explain what
You know, I'm certainly not an expert in ECT or electroconvulsive therapy, but I'll give you a little bit of the complexity of the situation. So the idea of ECT, which has been around for a long time, is that by inducing a seizure of an individual, you get an effect where people's, particularly depression, some whose mania, sometimes even psychosis, remits very quickly. And nobody knows why. The honest truth is, there's a lot of theories out there of why ECT works. But there's no question it helps some individuals. It helps them a lot, including when they didn't respond to other treatments. But nobody really understands why. Over time, it went from being considered a somewhat barbaric treatment, you see it went from the cuckoo's nest, where it's this horrible thing, and he's having this active convulsion, and he looks like he's being tortured. It became a much more benign procedure. So, for example, when I trained, you give a brief paralytic agent in a very protected environment with an anesthesiologist there. So they have no motor seizure. So the only firing that's happening is happening in their brain. So the person just is asleep for 5 minutes. And when they come out, they're not depressed. And I have to say, when you see that happen with certain individuals, it's pretty miraculous. So I think as the techniques for doing it and the press around it kind of went better, and people realized that it wasn't going to have to be a barbaric, torturous treatment, it's come back as being a useful treatment in some ways. It's never going to be the answer. One is, depression usually comes back, so it's not a permanent treatment. You have to have a series of them. And it causes short-term memory loss. So even if someone feels better and they're good, it messes with their memory. And so it's not something, and the more you do it, the more it messes with their memory. So it's not a great long-term treatment. So one more thing about ECT. People have tried to come up with even more benign versions, so that the one that's a little bit more contemporary now is something like TMS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation, which does not induce a seizure, but just puts a strong magnetic field. Now, its efficacy is less than an ECT, but it doesn't have the memory loss, and you don't even have to be paralyzed, so it doesn't have any other consequences. So people are experimenting with these other treatments. Of course, I'm in support of anything that helps people. Know how they work. And I think ultimately, we'll look back in 20, 30, 50 years, and these are going to seem fairly crude. But hey, better to do something useful than to do nothing at all. Oh, I know the last thing I wanted to say about the pharmaceutical industry, which is there has been a very important trajectory to think. We don't talk about that often because it's hard to know whether to be happy or sad about it, which is the following. The pharmaceutical industry, from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, was making enormous amounts of money on what they call CNS agents, which is psychiatric drugs. And the top 5 most profitable medications were typically a few of these CNS drugs. They were making tons and tons of money. At the same time, the cost of developing the drugs was rising, and the lawsuits about improper use of or marketing of them were rising. So it became true, I think this was probably true maybe around 2007, 2008, that it would cost $1 billion investment for a pharmaceutical industry, a company, to launch a new psychiatric medication. And the payoffs were no longer there. So they stopped developing new agents. So over the last 10 years, there have been very, very few new psychopharmacologic agents, which from the 80s through the early 2000s were happening much more regularly. And, the good news is I don't think the pharmaceutical industry should have been driving the whole field anyway, because I think that was biasing us in a way that, again, was driven by a kind of capitalist model that, yeah, there was innovation, but it was innovation in one particular direction. The bad news is those drugs are really helpful to people, and it's a problem that we're not developing new agents. So I don't know what the future will hold. There are some new ideas for new drugs, but if I had to guess, the field is going to move off in another direction, which is going to be much more along the lines than I was saying. We do around diagnostics, understanding pathophysiology, and then targeted behavioral interventions around these problems, particularly early in life. And ultimately, that to me is going to be far more successful than either the pharmaceuticals or the other biological treatments.
So I just want to thank you all for coming. We have some refreshments outside, and maybe you can stay a few minutes. Those of you that have questions you didn't get to ask. I do just want to call our next speaker, who's actually here with us this evening, Liz Roberts, and who, as Andrew mentioned, will be talking about some of the neuropsychological basis of autism. That'll be on November 26th, same place, same time. And we will be getting information about that. We'll be promoting that as well. So thanks again for coming.